All right, they're working me hard here at CIM in Montreal. We're doing another episode of Mining Now. We've had multiple hosts, multiple guests, and we've got a great company here on today. To wrap up the day is Ausenco. We have Gabriel Castillo. He is the climate change director at Ausenco. We're going to cover some very big topics, some complicated ones. So Ausenco's the right company to do that. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Have you done a lot of these sort of long form discussions before? Have you got a chance to do them?
About climate change?
Yeah.
Yeah, in general. Now, I was working with the mining sector in the last 23 years, more or less.
Yeah.
When I was the manager of a large copper operation, I decided to quit to start to do my PhD because I think that the industry still needs to learn more with a more deep understanding of what the climate change means and how that could impact the operations and how the industry can build a more sustainable way to produce the metals, now the critical metals that we require. So I moved to do my PhD, and after 3 years, I was focusing on research on climate change. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting way to bring that again to the industry.
Yeah. Have you? I'm always interested in people's. I don't know if sometimes people don't like to talk about. They like to try to talk about their their overarching role. But I'm always interested in people's day to day, and you're the climate change director at Ausenco. So I'm interested. What does a Monday look like for you? What is your focus? What is to wrap up the week? What is usually you're trying to put everything together at the end of the week? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, first, as Ausenco, we are a consulting firm, so we help our clients to achieve their goals that they have and the different areas that they need support. In my case, with my group, we help our clients to achieve the climate change goals, the climate change perspective, to assess the potential impacts and the risk with the extreme weather and prepare plans for adaptation as well. So my typical week will be to review with the clients their requirements, design the proposals with my team, contact them following the projects that we are right now under execution, and then as well interact with the academia or research groups to look what are the new things under development, because this is a topic that it's not new, the climate change, but there's still a lot of research going on. Yeah. And it's important to have the last information to provide that as well to our clients.
So you're kind of facilitating all three of you. You mentioned your team, the clients, academia. You're sort of facilitating, trying to route all three of them.
Yeah, I call myself to support the collaboration between the different areas. I am sitting in the sustainability group and as well in contact with the project development team, those who design all the projects and the facilities for the operations. So project delivery provide that information, and we support them as well with the understanding of how sustainability could be used to have a design in the operations.
There's a graphic that comes from Ausenco, and I want to actually take our time to look at this because, and there's a reason, because I've done a lot of these shows and we'll talk about indigenous groups, we'll talk about mine planning, and I'm looking at here, the transportation, logistics, and we walk through these things, but so often the audience doesn't have a picture. People that are within the mining sector, they understand, but this graphic, so I'm going to show it to you. You know it already.
Right.
But it actually shows what, in a real world scenario, what the setup is. I don't know if this is an actual mine, but it's a good graphic.
Yeah,
sort of,
for sure. I always say it's a holistic view. Is the integration of all the different areas as we work as well as company in Ausenco. We call a pit to port. So you start the pit, the operation in the mining area. So we provide the services since the environmental impact assessment, supporting as well the design for the pre-feasibility for the new projects, and then be able to transport, for example, with the logistic, the pipeline to transport the concentrate to the port. We have a team as well working on the port. And during all that stage, you are near communities. And we have the team as well working with the communities, the environmental impact assessment, the biodiversity, the management of the operation, and the management of the sustainability aspects. So all of that process we integrate together. Our different teams in Ausenco are able to communicate, collaborate together with our clients, and provide a full service. So that is interesting as well. When I came to work to Ausenco, to understand that it's not just sustainability, it's as well the engineering perspective, it's the design, how we can combine that all together.
It's, how would I ask this? Where do you think mining is in an industry? I know this is a loaded question and not an easy one to answer, but where do you think they're at as an industry with understanding this graphic and how to actually put it all together? Where do you think they are as a whole?
Well, I will say it depends where in what stage of the mine life cycle is each company. There are companies that are doing the exploration stage, others on the profitability, construction or operation, or even others working on closure. And we see right now that there are companies that are returning to the closure sites or the assets to be able to contribute and manage that and create a natural capital like biodiversity management. In general, the industry and thinking on the critical minerals, the focus on be able to continue doing the extraction because the ore deposits are the grade of the ore deposits are going down. So you require to do more use of water, more area of footprint, and that for sure will produce more waste and more impact in the communities and the environment. So the combination of understand that process with a holistic perspective and be able to manage that in a sustainable way is critical since the beginning to be able to plan that ahead for the next 20 or 30 years for the industry.
What is Ausenco when you're coming in and talking to a client? What are you from sustainability? What does it mean to Ausenco? How is that communicated to the client in a way that is essentially palatable for them?
Yeah, I would say that our multiple countries experience and the diversity of people that we have in the company help us to support our clients wherever they are, because we can work with a company that is the headquarters based in Vancouver, but their operations are in Chile. So we have the team here working in Canada with them and that knows what are the corporate standards of this company, but as well their operation in Chile, for example, we have another big team as well working in the engineer perspective, in the sustainability, that understand the local context. So together we can provide this service to our.
How different are those sometimes? Are they pretty well aligned?
In general, yeah, we obviously is a challenge always on the collaboration perspective to continue doing or working together with a specific different requirements in the context where the operations of future projects are. There are changing in the legal perspective. There are differences in the permitting areas, and for sure the ecosystem is totally different. You will find areas that are more dry or require more water for the production, or other areas like here in Canada that we have a lot of water, so requires more management of the water, and the ecosystem is different. So all that analysis requires the application for the design of the tailing facilities, for the mill, for the pipeline, for the port. So all that combination of technology is important.
I'm asking this question. It's not to pick on the mining industry. I'm from the mining industry. I want the industry to always becoming better. Where do you see, and it may be different in different countries, so maybe you have examples, where do you see their Achilles heel? Where are they struggling the most in that pit to port that they need to do a better job, but where, for whatever reason, they're and I'm sure there are some legitimate ones. Where did they struggle, do you think, the most?
I think there's no a specific area. I think will depends of the context where the operations or the future operation is. It will depends, but perhaps to obtain the social consensus and be able to understand the times of the operation versus the social times. Because we have in the operation, we have our times. We need to do the exploration and in the next years be able to present to the market where the ore is and how the project will be developed in the next 5 years and 10 years. But for a community, that is not their time. If we want to have a permit for January, perhaps for them is the time of harvesting or doing hunting. So they say, no, we are going to talk in March, or we are going to talk in the springtime. No, now. But the corporate level wants perhaps to pursue or move forward with the project, the operation, but start to understand that they need to wait for the time that as well the local communities have the time to talk.
This is it's a very interesting answer. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm just going to try to clarify. Are you, the technology is there, the ability is there, but that doesn't necessarily translate into social license. Is that what you're getting at?
And even I like more than social license. I like the social consensus word, because you talk about and you arrive at a consensus with the local communities, with the local government as well, on how to develop a project. You turn to be part of the neighborhood and you support the development of a specific project. So you look for this social consensus with the local communities, with the local government. And what I say is that sometimes the timing or the planning that the mining companies design based at, as we as engineers, we say, okay, this is my schedule in the next 30 years. And the first 5 years, I'm going to do exploration. Next 10 years, the construction, permitting, operation. But that exactly time doesn't work like that for the local communities. So it needs to be that understanding first, and then be able to define the operation and the time frame that is required for the correct execution of a project.
Do you think some of the technology that I get to sit here and listen to it's unbelievable, but how do you go to a community and say, okay, here's 1,000 interviews.
Yeah.
They're not going to listen to those. Here's 50 white papers on all the sensors and the flow charts and all that stuff. But yet I've also seen where I think mines have been too high level. And I've always gone back to this. There was a mine where the community thought there was going to be too much noise and dust. But from a technical perspective, and I looked at it unbiasedly, I was just curious because it was near a community that I care about. And they had a system in place to mitigate that. It wasn't a legitimate concern in that particular case, but it became part of the story that it was. Okay. And they lost control of it. The mine never happened. The mine didn't go ahead. How do you think mines need to do that when they've got it done right? And they haven't always. But when they have done it right, where do you think that fine line is? This is a technical information, and this is our public presentation. It's tricky. It really is.
Totally. I understand. And perhaps with my other hat as from the academia, understanding how to translate the technical information for a lay group and be able to explain to all in simple words what the things means. And as well, it's critical to understand the context and how the different communities or group of population communicate or translate that information. And it's based as well in the history that they had before. Unfortunately, for the mining sector in the past, there were different impacts in the environment or in the communities. We still see some of them around the world. So that is the impact of what they see in general, what is happening. And they have natural concerns. And the idea is to explain to them exactly how the things work to build this trust. So when it's a relationship that you need to manage. It's not just like, I obtain my permit and that's it. And then I will see you in 2 years when I need another permit. No, it's a relation that needs to keep in constant communication, invite them to see other similar operations, invite the community to listen what they are the really concerns. Probably are not the environment, probably are not the water, perhaps are more the economic development and the work opportunities or jobs that will be in the operation. But as well, some elders, perhaps the concerns are in terms of the biodiversity or impacts that they saw in the past, and they want just to keep that moving with a friendly and ecological process that doesn't affect the nature. So I think that is critical, that communication process to continue talking with them, understanding and build that relation is critical since the beginning.
I want to pivot over to the decarbonization. Big word. It's I don't fully understand it, to be honest. I was watching I'm watching a hockey game yesterday. My team doesn't even get on the radar of getting in the playoffs anymore, so I don't want to talk about hockey. But the a lot of the ads, they're claiming that they're carbon neutral. I know some of these companies. I have a tough time seeing that that's completely accurate, so I'm a little
Right.
suspect of it. It's a complicated. There's probably maybe someone like yourself who has a good understanding of what it means to be carbon neutral, decarbonization. A lot of us do not understand what's going on,
Right.
or what even that we're trying to accomplish, and certainly not how we're going to accomplish it. What is your sort of high level understanding of it? And then let's dive into it, specific to the mining sector.
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, the climate change is not something new in general.
No.
We know that the Anthropocene and the relation with the humans, with the Earth in general, we are polluted that, and we increase the temperature because the consumption of the fuel, and that increase the global warming in general. But after the Paris Agreement in 2015, there were an increase and more interest from the companies and to be able to reduce that global warming and avoid the impacts of the climate change for the society in general. So most of the companies start to talk about that. And the most important, the banks, the lenders, the investors start to look specific on that situation. How the companies where my money as investor will be, I want to see that they have a plan to avoid to increase the global warming, to reduce the potential impacts that is producing to the environment, and how that will reduce as well the potential impacts of the climate change in general. That is a challenge for all the society. So I think when the investors start to make more pressure in that perspective, the companies start to work on looking how to reduce that carbon footprint, and a process to understand the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, that are the different sectors or areas of the emissions that we produce, or in general that the companies produce, and how to manage that process. So, and then the decarbonization is the transition process for use energy, clean energy that will come from hydroelectrics or other areas that has less emissions than the fuels.
Where do you think the mining industry, like you, should be looking for that decarbonization? Where do you think their biggest opportunities are, if you could put it in a few buckets?
Yeah. First, I think that when we talk about climate change, usually there is a focus on mitigation, that is the reduction of the emissions of the greenhouse gases, but as well there is a process on understand the adaptation strategies, how to be able to cope for the potential impacts of climate change. So the decarbonization, there is a lot of technology now that are coming to reduce, for example, the combustion on the trucks that are using in the operations, the plants, the mill, as well all the metallurgic process, the reduction of that elements, and the use of energy and other elements, chemicals that are using, and how to reduce that. But as well, we can use the adaptation strategies to reduce the potential impacts on climate change, and all that process helps as well to reduce the carbon footprint.
This is actually, I think I can expand on this properly from that answer. Is that, does that end up being decarbonization at a operation, or is that, you got it to build a battery, you got to mine it, you got it. Yep. There's a lot that has to happen to get that operation. So it's decarbonized. Where do you think we are at getting that down the supply chain, though? Because all of these different operations feed in, and now all this production, all this mining, all the fuel that's going to create this now has to end up in that. So from an overall perspective, how do you see a way forward from that, as opposed to just one operation being decarbonized? What about the supply chain that feeds that operation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and not just the supply chain, but as well the design and the opportunities, for example, to work together with other sites. If 2 or 3 companies that are working in a similar region decide to work in just one tailing, So they will reduce the carbon footprint. They will reduce the emissions that they are using. If they decide to work in the different ore deposits that they have with similar plants, or the trucks that they are using, and invest all together, working together, this will reduce the carbon footprint and for sure reduce the emissions that in the group will produce
in an entire area.
Right.
Can that be done? Has that been done?
There are some examples of that around the world, but this is still something that needs to continue doing. There's a challenge for sure. Different companies, they have different perspective.
Yeah.
There is the different time,
different investors, different capital. Yeah,
absolutely. So needs to be a conversation around that. But when you put in over the table how we can work together to create a more sustainable mining process, that will help as well and the decision makers and bring as well the investors to understand that process, and that will help hopefully to arrive to that agreements.
Yeah, I'm going to expand on that question a little more, and it's a tough question. It is a tough question. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but that going beyond even that though, I mean, we've been seeing the news of some of these mines that are, where batteries are getting, the products for batteries are getting sourced and stuff. And it's not right. It's not how mining should be done. It's not, people aren't getting treated right. How do you think the mining industry, how long before us as an industry, you've got a gold mine, let's say a Canadian gold mine, it's doing it beautifully. It's taking care of the environment. It's taking care of its people. You're seeing down Latin America, but then around the world, you're still seeing operations that are not operating the right way, and they're not treating people the right way. How do we, as an industry, hold those companies accountable so that they start doing it right?
Right. And I think the industry in general, we have here the Towards Sustainability from the Mining Association of Canada that set guidelines that support as well, not just Canadian mining, but different countries or operations around the world are using that one. The ICMM as well has guidelines to how to apply and manage in different levels of the operation. So, but at the end are those the investors who are going to make a pressure on how to change that, but as well the market, those who are going to buy the product.
Yes.
I recall like 5-7 years ago talking about how amazing will be when somebody proposed to get married to your girlfriend, and you arrive and say, I want to marry you, right? And you are certified that this is a goal that comes for a specific area that has human rights, manage the environment, the water, produce economic development for the communities. So has a value.
Yes.
So I think it's something that will start to push, and as well
you hopeful of it?
The market.
You do think it'll get better?
I think so, because it's a value that you add to the process, and you know that what you are bringing to the person in that beautiful day is even with more value, right?
More purity to it.
Yes.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, so this is an example, right?
Yes, of course.
There are different ways as well, but the market at the end will decide how to use that. But when the market is educated as well, they will start to request this for the companies, and the companies will need to align on this.
Yes. The technology, we have to touch a little bit more on that side, because the technology to reach sustainability, to your focus, I guess what's your perspective? You've been in the industry, and so you've sort of seen this explosion of technology that's entered the mining industry. With your specific role, where do you see it landing? What is sort of your perspective as you're watching these companies surge into the industry? Yeah,
and it's amazing. I would say in the last 7-8 years, how the technology started to grow immensely, and now we have the artificial intelligence, all the algorithms to predict potential failures, and the use of drones in the tailings to understand potential failures, and the scanners using pictures, satellite. So all of that information and technology, it's a lot of data. The most important is how we use this information to be able to take decisions, informed decisions. But as well, we have a lot of, I recall 15 years ago, the sustainability reports. And beyond the great pictures that were there were a lot of data. And now we have a lot of indicators. But what we need, the challenge still is how we use these indicators to change. And it's not like the same indicators each year in the sustainability reports. So, and we need to be able to use all that technology and the use of these KPIs to start to make a change as well and to take decisions and show that to our stakeholders and as well to the investors. And all together, look in a positive perspective and look how we can do the different, finding a better way.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It is an exciting time to be a part of the industry. I was going to ask, I was just looking at my notes here because there's a couple things I wanted to ask. The increased, is it helpful to Ausenco when you're trying to implement these strategies and doing your consulting services? The increased regulation, the pressure from governments, from investors, does it make your job easier because you're actually having to deliver in a narrower sphere? There's not so like there's certain things you just have to do now, so you can just put it in, or does it make it more complicated?
Yeah, well,
both.
Again, I will say we are lucky to have an interdisciplinary team with different regions, and that different knowledge of that specific regions help us to understand the specific requirements.
Yeah.
So we are able to address that needs for our clients and say, in British Columbia, this is the specific legislation that we need to do. It's different on Halifax, it's different in Manitoba. Just to talk here with our province, right?
Yeah.
And if we look to in the south, our neighbor, the same is different. And then if we move to South America or South Africa, it's totally different. So in our case, what the different teams that we have globally with the local understanding, and then working together with the local understanding, but working together with a general view of what is required to do within the technology, the approach based on the context, local context, we help our clients to arrive for the decision that they need to do and then move forward with the projects.
I'm really curious about this, that in Canada, we've seen we've seen an increase in regulations. I think that's a fair thing to say. And I'm curious in comparison, like you mentioned, South Africa or down into Latin American countries, are they adding in the same regulatory things as Canada at the same rate? I mean, obviously they're all adding them in, but do you have any sort of gauge on the comparison of South Africa to Canada or to Chile or just your perspective on it?
I think in my experience, Canada is always looking like a mining country with a lot of experience and for sure a lot of management in terms of environment because of our ecosystem. We have our country has a lot of water, a lot of different kind of ecotypes or ecosystem. So when all the regulation and the management that we have here in Canada could be applied as well in different countries. And Global Affairs Canada is doing a very interesting job translating and providing support for the different countries to increase or to improve the legal or regulatory perspectives that they have. I was lucky and glad to be invited by Global Affairs Canada in different times to support in Dominican Republic, in Argentina, in Chile, Peru, to improve the regulation or the standards in terms of climate change, of environmental impact assessment, on mine closure. So it's important what we are doing here, in a sense of it's not just impacting the operations that are here in Canada, but as well we as Canadians, how we are supporting other countries to look the sustainability perspective and how to produce and be able to improve the sustainable management on the mining companies. And as well, our mining companies, the Canadian mining companies here are working in different regions. And for example, in South America, they apply as well the regulations that we have or the standards or the guidelines that we have and improve as well the local knowledge. So I think it's super important, this process.
It is an exciting time to be part of the mining industry. We'll wrap up this last question with, what would you, when a company, if let's say someone watches this interview and they reach out to you and say, okay, we've got this project we want to start, where do you think, what is the mindset that they should go into when you're talking about sustainability and ESG and all these things that they now have to have the forefront just to get the capital, never mind the project getting underway. What do you think their high level approach can be at the executive levels?
Yeah, I think the understanding of the long term, as the mining always is a long term process, but understand how the local context is, what are the potential impacts or implications as well that a new operation, an operation will be in that area, because the mining arrived to an area that exists before, will extract the minerals that if it's not extracted has no value. The industry needs to extract that deposit to have a value.
Yeah.
And then we'll close it. So to be able to have all the long-term picture of that process, that is why we usually say start to design your closure since the beginning.
Yeah.
It's important to understand all the cycles since the beginning, and with that be able to have the lenders, the banks to manage the risk, to involve all since the beginning.
The local community, all of that. Yeah. No, it's very important. And thank you, Gabriel, for coming on the show. I hope this is not our last time. Actually, I think is Ausenco doing another episode tomorrow? I don't think it's with you. I think we're doing multiple episodes.
With Ausenco.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously one episode, it's just it's a little dent in the company of your scale. So thank you for taking the time. I really do appreciate
you for having me here, and I enjoy a lot this time.
All right. Hope you come back. Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Some important questions covered in this episode, and we'll continue to expand on them, because as much as we promote technology and that, you need to be discussing all levels of mining, and that's what Mining Now is about. If we want the future of mining to be better, not just for us here, but all around the world for everyone. So thank you for watching. We will see you on the next episode of Mining Now.